I'm Rob Casper. I'm the head of the Poetry and Literature Center at the Library of Congress, and I am joined via technology with the U.S. Poet Laureate, Joy Harjo.
Hey,
Hi, Joy. Joy and I have spent a lot of time with one another over the course of the past year, and we'll talk a little bit about that and about all the fun we'll have to come. And we have some time for questions from AWP members. But before we begin, I would like to thank Juanita Lester, the Director of Social Media, and Sheila Black, the Director of Development at the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, for setting this whole virtual conversation up. And so with that, why don't we begin? Joy, a lot has changed since I talked to you, or was supposed to talk to you last year, right about this time. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what life has been like as the Poet Laureate.
Well, it's been quite a year for a number of reasons. I mean, there's the Poet Laureate and then this pandemic. But yeah, I mean, I don't think, I didn't expect to be named Poet Laureate, and it, suddenly you've gone from one kind of presence to another. So it's been a lot of talking, a lot of talking and interviews and I see it as an ambassadorship. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and so do we. But
I'm an ambassador for poetry.
Say it again?
Yeah, I'm an ambassador for poetry.
Yeah.
And I'm learning the position as I go. It's something that and I remember you saying earlier, as everyone makes the position their own.
Yeah.
Just the poet does,
Yeah.
We make our own kind of road. So it's been it's teaching me a lot. It's teaching me about really, I mean, I know that poetry is powerful. I've seen it at a very intimate level. I've seen it in in large groups, and I've seen how it's moved people in nations all over the world into some kind of cohesive vision. And has poetry is a place to speak the kind of grief that you can't speak, and it's but to be in this position gives me another kind of point of view. And actually, mostly who I see are these people who write to me. I mean, it comes down to this smaller level, really. It comes down to the intimate, smaller level. So I have a lot of young Native people, very proud, because this is about them. I'm holding it for people. It's not about me. And then the young people I talk with, older people, it's kind of put me in touch with society in a very different kind of way.
Yeah. So just a bit of context for our viewers. The Poetry and Literature Center is the home of the U.S. Poet Laureate, and we support the Poet Laureate position. I've had the opportunity to work with 6 U.S. Poets Laureate, and I basically told them what I told you, Joy, when we started, which is A, this will change your life, and B, you'll have this opportunity to go out there and represent poetry in ways you never have before. And it is exciting to see how everyone does it differently. And yet it does seem like for the first term, all Poets Laureate end up doing more readings, more events than they ever thought they could. And maybe you could talk about the crazy schedule you've been on until very recently because of extenuating circumstances.
Yes, I was traveling and going sometimes 2 and 3 places a week. And for the 3 months I had, the last 3 months, it's generally how I make my living, is performing. In the last 3 months, everything, of course, for all of us was either canceled or postponed or rescheduled, or only one of them went into a virtual. I did a virtual reading for University of California, Berkeley.
What was that?
Well, it was so strange to do a reading like this,
Yeah.
because I like to feel, and you move along with the feel of the people. And I don't always know, I have kind of a rough list, but I go with what I'm feeling and, feel out the room and everyone. So it was different. So I had to stop. take a breath and say, okay, I know people are out there. I can kind of feel, I had to kind of move into a wavelength that, so I could feel people, but it wasn't in a visceral way, which I like. I like the visceral way. And so it went pretty well. They said they had about 600 people attending, virtually.
Yeah.
But I prefer seeing people. I like that give and take. I like meeting people afterwards. And I'm wondering how in the future that's going to work, like signing books. I imagine that's not going to work for a while unless we sign things and give them to them. But it's, I miss that.
Yeah.
But the other hand, so what's so odd is, here was this very public position, and now it's shut down for everyone. The pandemic has made our world more domestic and more, singular, so that we're forced to go in.
Yeah.
Forced to go inside. Either we go inside, or we watch Netflix all day.
Yeah.
Or all of the above. right. But so, and then this virtual thing has come about, which it concerns me about it replacing, just like the internet, the appearance of cell phones, and the internet has shifted conversation, how we, how we have conversations, the depth of our conversations, how we communicate with each other. And so I wonder about this virtual performing, virtual interviews, and what it's it's changing. It will change the way we interact with each other. It already has.
Yeah. Have you found in your own life and or as poet laureate that this virtual life leads to unexpected surprises or connections?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I've been very happy I've been a little grumpy sometimes because I have a memoir deadline, and now I have an album, a musical album, singing album I'm working on. So I get into that mode, and then I have these other things to do. But I remember I love that this young poet did this. Layla Chatti came out with her new book, Deluge, from Copper Canyon Press. And she can't get out. It's her, her big book. She can't get out and promote it. So she did an event and had it posted to YouTube, and had several people who had mentored her through her years of being a young poet. And we all came on, including Naomi Shihab and others, and we all came on and read one of her poems, one of ours, and then she was so gracious. And it was like we came on and she did a praise of it was a praise of teachers event. But and then she read, and I love that. And I realized that in Dorianne, is it Lux? How you say it? I heard her say Lux. Yeah, Dorianne Lux, who's always loved her poetry. And she's really funny too. I liked being on there, but I thought, whoa, here I was worried. I had told them, well, I can go on 5 minutes, but then I got to go. I'm working, and I stayed on the whole time because I had such a good time listening to poetry, and then visiting and seeing people, and hearing other poets. So in that way, that was a surprise surprise to me.
Yeah, no, I found the same thing. And I've just found that connecting to family is different because suddenly we're all using video chats in ways we didn't before. And you can see a bunch of family members from around the country all together at the same time, which is very different than, my weekly phone calls to my parents, say. Well, let's talk a little bit about where you are and what that's meant for you, especially at this time. So right before you were named poet laureate, you moved back to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Can you tell us the rationale behind that and what you came to Tulsa to be part of?
Well, yes, I came back first when to help my mother pass, and then I moved back here from New Mexico within a few months.
Okay.
I knew I had to be here. I love New Mexico. I have dual citizenship with New Mexico and Oklahoma, but my tribal nation is here, and I knew I had to be here. Then I left for a while to go to for a position, wonderful people at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and got to go around in our old homelands. But I came back. I'm a Tulsa Artist Fellow, for one, so I have a studio space. My plan before this was to start painting, and then I have these projects, including a musical. But yeah, but I came back. I knew that I had to come back. Something you do because, I prefer to live by the ocean. I love the ocean. I love desert. I love the ocean. And but there's something, and Oklahoma is so, the history here is just so often so difficult. I think it still is in some ways. And yet, it's been a place of refuge for a lot of people. So, I came back here and I realized this is where I needed to be. I mean, if I look at where my poetry comes from, there's a long line. There's Alexander Posey, a Muskogee Creek poet, who is actually one of my relatives. And there is a reason. We all have these roots. I think we have roots, certainly poetry roots, we have familial roots, and so on. And there's always this kind of interaction back and forth on them. And this was part of where I began to write poetry in New Mexico. But this is to connect everything in a way. At this point, at this time in my life, when I'm at the last part of it, the last phrase, the last phrase. I like that.
That makes sense too.
Yeah, it does. It does. But this is where I need to be.
Yeah. And it's interesting too that you've had this time in Tulsa in which you've been traveling both west and east for the poet laureateship, and then suddenly all that came to a stop, and you've had this deadline with the memoir sitting there in the album. And maybe you can talk about that sudden turn to your own work.
I kind of crashed. It wasn't a sudden graceful turn. I think I just got here and just crashed.
Yeah.
I had been running so hard, and I knew that I had been doing, it gets dangerous when you talk too much, and I was doing way too much talking.
Yeah.
So
as we talk.
Yeah, I know, right. And then so much just gets asked of you. And but I've had so many resources and so much support. It's been amazing, from you guys and AWP and organizations and NEA, people I've known for years. I've been at this for years and years and years. Actually, I realized the other day it was 48 years I've been writing.
Wow.
48. I thought it was 50, which should make a nice round number. I could say 50, but
really, you can say 50. No.
Yeah,
like live, or this isn't going out to the world.
Going around with writing, but yeah. So I crashed.
Yeah.
And then I had to it's not calibrate. Maybe it is calibrate into that kind of space, because it is a different kind of space. I've learned that performing is a creative. There's be prepared. That's the first thing, is to be prepared, and then I realized that being on stage and even speaking, I never always know what I'm going to say. I might write a whole speech out or keynote. Sometimes my horn is part of my keynote, but I move with it and see where it will go.
Right.
But to be home, I crashed, and I just needed time because I've been running and running. I tend to do that anyway. I think I'm one of these people that has kind of got half of me is very, very analytical, so much that I can drive myself crazy with it, analyzing constantly. Then the other half is the poet, dreamer, but you need both of those to make anything, really. You need the vision and that connection with the place of poetry.
Yeah.
The place, it's the place of all, the place where the plants come from, the place where they all come from. And then you need your hammer and nails, so to speak, to cobble it together. But I took a while. I had to kind of crash, and then I started being hit with all these requests for words of wisdom and poetry and during this time.
Yeah, which is a tricky thing. I
Yeah.
mean, we turn to poetry for that kind of perspective, for even that kind of advice or solace or instruction or just authority. And yet, when you're a person living in such a moment, just like everybody else, but you're also the U.S. Poet Laureate, and people say, tell us what we should do, tell us how we should handle this, tell us what we should think and feel and how we should act. How do you respond to that?
Oh, I can't tell anybody how to act. I'm going to do it first myself. But I like what Billy Collins said in one of these the Poetry Society of America has this series of poets reading poets that helped him and inspired him. And I liked what he said is that poetry's purpose isn't only to comfort or to give sustenance in a time of trouble. It's even in times like these, we need poetry for all sorts of for humor. So he talked about a humorous poem.
Yeah.
Because, and I think poetry too is like it comes from that kind of space, from that internal space that is both the hammer and nails and the dreams, together. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I did turn to your book, An American Sunrise, in thinking about this moment, because as I read it, I remembered feeling this great sort of sense of time and a sort of sweep of history that seemed useful then and even more useful now. And I wonder if you might read one of the poems on page 95, a poem called Beyond.
Okay. So this is called Beyond. I actually started writing this poem first in Muskogee Creek language, but my language isn't up to the level of a poet in my tribal language, and I got to probably the first line. Hososa Tlinto Petla, and went on. I got about the first 3 lines here. And then I called my friend, my translator friend, Rosemary McCombs Maxey, and I said, help. I also had a deadline. This was for a project out of England for translations of endangered languages.
No kidding.
I just went writing. I just went and finished it in English. And I told them, I said, no, I did not write all this in Muskogee. This was the process.
Yeah, you translated it yourself.
But I loved doing that because what it did was it made me stop. I started, I learned some intricacies of the language that I didn't know, before just trying to write this poem.
No kidding. Like, can you read the poem and then tell us the intricacies you're talking about?
Oh, I can't even. I'd have to go back and pull my notes out.
Yeah.
Because it has to do with, there's a lot about grammar and diction that I'd have to look at it broken down.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That you just naturally think through when you're writing or reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of lays things out in a different way.
Yeah.
It's not like English. And I think that, it's the verbal stuff is more present than the nouns. It's not a noun focused language.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like process and verbal movement. Yeah. But then to tell you exactly how, I don't know it that well enough yet, but that's one of my goals.
Yeah.
Is to do that. So I started this in Muskogee, and so it's a little different in Muskogee, but it's the same, similar. I think it probably did come out of a Muskogean sensibility.
Yeah.
Where you look at time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a sensibility before there were clocks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, before there were clocks that ruled us, Beyond sunrise, there is a song we follow. Beyond clouds, traveling with rain humped on their backs, lightning in their fists. Beyond the blue horizon, where our ancestors appear bearing gifts wrapped in blankets woven with sun and strands of scarlet time. Beyond the footpaths we walk every day, from sunrise to kitchen to work to garden to play to sunset to dark and back. Beyond where the baby sleeps, her breath a light mist of happiness, making a fine rainbow of becoming knowledgeable around us. Beyond the children learning alphabets and numbers, bent over their sticks and dolls as they play war and family, grow human paths. Beyond the grandmothers and grandfathers, their mothers and fathers in the marrow of their bones, to when that song was first sung, we traveled on. Beyond sunset, can you hear it? The shaking of shells, the drumming of feet, the singers singing all of us all at once in this song of beyond, how deep we are.
That's such an amazing poem, and I'm struck by how it begins with one kind of perspective, the perspective of looking at a scene and imagining sunrise and what's beyond sunrise, and then it travels and gives a kind of perspective of time and lineage that the image itself kind of lends helps us move towards. Did you begin with that beyond sunrise as an image that you were thinking about, and then just go from there?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and about how there's a song that maybe everyone has a song that they are shaped around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it has a beginning point, and it has a point, there's different points of shifting along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And also from this point of view, starting with the baby and moving all the way up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your perspective shifts with age. It's every age has a particular perspective.
Right. And it's interesting too, just how it uses repetition to evoke that, to make us think about the repetition of lineage, that kind of repetition of who came before us to bring us to who we are.
Even in the most smallest kind of acts that you would think, why in the world is that passed on? Like a certain kind of gesture. I mean, I have great grandchildren now. I have 2 great grandsons, and I say, oh my God, my brother. That's just like my brother.
Yeah.
And then you'll think, now why does this characteristic have to be carried on?
Yeah.
Well, we're still dealing with it. We haven't, this is the human story field, and it's not interesting unless there's conflict. That's what I've learned. And I've wondered about that, about the point of conflict here on Earth. It's like I say here in the poem, the kids play war and family.
Yes.
And I used to do both. I'd go out. I got in a big fight because the boys said, well, you have to be the nurse if we're playing war. And I gave a big old speech, which none of them, appreciated, and just kept playing, and not as a nurse.
I'm sure.
But I've noticed that, with my children, the grandchildren, my son used to draw very exact drawings of different, war machines.
Yeah.
And then I was of the generation, it's not a Muskogee Creek trait, but my generation where you say no guns.
Mm-hmm.
My son would make guns out of a sandwich, out of a cookie. But I wondered about that. I wonder about that because there's in all of us, every one of us has the fight. Yeah. We all, it's within us. And I think, okay, this is an energy. How do we use it?
Yeah.
Sometimes there is defense. Sometimes we need it. And then there's the other part where you make a circle. Yeah. It's different. It's like, how do you move horizontally versus vertically? Mm-hmm. And, a lot of our cultures try to embody to make a balance. The Muskogee culture, if you look at deep into our philosophy, it's ultimately about how do you take both of these impulses and then find a shape, make a shape for it or a balance.
Yeah. But wouldn't you say that poetry is exactly that, that it's taking often opposing impulses or seemingly opposing impulses and making a shape that contains them both and celebrates them both and puts them together for us to kind of have to work through.
Probably. I mean, I think what I look at, or what is what I notice most often, are one, rhythm,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is contradictions.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's, and I, the contradictory nation, contradictory. Well, yeah, yes, that was a nice slip, but
Yeah.
the contradictory nature, of human beings. How you're one way and you're another. And a poem can embody that. A poem can hold that.
Yeah.
I think that's what intrigues me. It really intrigues me, is these contradictions, and because I feel such a contradiction myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel that also plays out in music and in your musical performance?
I think so. I mean, I think often. I mean, I don't feel like I fulfill any label that I've been named. It's like I don't look like everybody. I don't act like, I think about a poet now. When I was a kid, I thought of a poet as even though I loved Emily Dickinson and knew about her, I thought about him as an old white man living somewhere in the East, it was very rainy in New England or England, declaiming. And then, and even now I get those when I'm in groupings of poets, well, I don't act like a poet. It's like what is I don't necessarily fit the role. I do my own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what does a native poet look like?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't look like, what does Pocahontas look like? I don't look like the character in Disney.
Yeah.
We all are, I'm full of these contradictions.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
What does it mean? But I'm aware of deep contradictions, even of, how can you travel to the moon?
Uh-huh.
You can do it in a poem. You can do it in a visionary way.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can do it, using NASA spacecraft.
Yeah.
But you can put all those in a poem.
Yeah. Yeah.
You put in different times in a poem, and you can sing it in a way. I mean, because what's most compelling too is the language.
Yeah.
The language of how, of how.
And the way we can all connect to the voice of a poem.
Mm-hmm.
And we have our entryways, and yet we share that common sense of understanding the world differently through a poem than, we might a song or a painting or a play. That something about the compression of that language right there evokes a sense of being in the world and understanding how we speak and act, how we use language, but is still mysterious.
Mm-hmm. That's what compels me too, is the mystery.
Yeah, yeah.
If I know what I'm doing, then I know I'm already in trouble.
Yeah.
I'm going towards the mystery.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily hear it in the language of this poem. I could see it being criticized for, I'm very highly critical, so I already know what people, I know, as well, it's simple, or well, it's not language bound. It's not, but yes, it's absolutely language.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think so, most definitely. And I was struck reading it too by how artfully you used sensual imagery, how you engage different senses. And I think to get to that moment in the Song of Beyond How Deep We Are, after focusing in many ways on what visually lies just beyond us, was a really surprising shift and an exciting shift for me.
Yeah, and it's in the ordinary.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I read for one of these virtual things that wonderful, I love Galway Kinnell's poetry, because for a number of reasons, he's a brilliant poet, a Book of Nightmares, but he's tactile and he's sensual. I read the poem. It was about these times, but I was thinking about what Billy Collins said, and I was thinking too, it's like, but here we are in the domestic sphere, and there's going to be a lot of babies born after, in 9 months. And
Yeah.
beautiful poem about his son, waking. Of course, he could hear him snore, hear all these sounds, but as soon as he hears the parents making love, then he's up and in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that sensuality of I always loved having the children in bed with me.
Yeah.
And just smelling them and just that sensibility.
Yeah.
But I like that in a poem. I came to poetry. Well, first I came because through my mother's music. She wrote music, so it was song lyrics and listening to her song lyrics. And then she loved poetry. She loved William Blank, Little Lamb, what is it? Little Lamb. I don't know. I can't move into that, Tiger, burning bright in the forest.
Yeah.
And then her song lyrics, which came from, and I see a little of that in my work, these heartbreak ballads. I have a tendency, when I'm at my worst, that's where I go. That's where my poems go.
Yeah.
Heartbreak ballad kind of place. But I came to poetry. I was an BFA major. I was majoring in studio art when I became a poet. So I like that tactile sense of imagery. And my earliest poems were like one image driven, as if I were as if I were painting something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they moved. Painting something with words, and because you can't deny it's the words and the craft of words.
Yeah. Yeah.
And intonations and phrasing and yeah.
Definitely. Well, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to talk about the fact that you have been renewed for a second term as Poet Laureate, and talk a little bit about what that means for you and what you're looking to do in that second term.
So, yeah, the second term. We'll see how the second term goes. There's a lot of things in this first term. It's been kind of an interesting ride.
Yeah, no joke.
And we're in a changed world.
Yeah.
Very changed world, because I don't think this pandemic thing, it's not just going to clear up. We're going to be dealing with it probably for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. But I'm excited about, I remember early on when I was creating, in art and then in writing as poetry. And I started writing poetry as out of Native rights movements, as trying to find a way to say what I was hearing and seeing and so on. And I remember thinking, if I do nothing else, if I come to the end of my life where I'm taking my last breath, I want Natives to be seen as human beings.
Yeah.
It might sound impossible or simple, but it's actually quite profound.
Yeah.
Because it has something to do with that underpinning of that has a lot to do too with, I think, the history of America or the direction of America.
Yeah.
So for the project, and I was asked early on from my earliest interviews, I'm going to pull up something, what are you going to do for your project? And I'm saying, project?
I know.
I don't know what project. I just got asked to be the Poet Laureate. I don't know. But of course, I had all kinds of ideas. I always do. I've always got.
Yeah.
I always have a list. Every day I could come up with a new project.
Yeah.
And we did.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, but we have a project called Living Nations, Living Words, a map of First Peoples poetry. And we're all really excited about it. It's going to be I guess I wanted to use resources of the Library of Congress. This appointment is an appointment by the library, and I love that. I've always loved libraries. They were my refuge, the place I would go for survival, to get out of the house. And I just loved going into a library, and I could find out almost anything I wanted to find out. So I became the go-to person for anybody in my circle with questions they were too embarrassed to go look up in the library. I would go look up in the library.
Yeah.
And but one of the first things I did is I wanted to go check out what the library had and offered. So I'm excited because we're collaborating with it's the Maps and Geography. I don't remember the exact name of that department.
Yeah. Geography and Maps.
Yeah, what is it?
Geography and Maps Division.
Yeah, Geography and Maps Division and the American Folklife. I'd worked with them before with they brought my band in, my Poetic Justice band in at one point for one of their big summer outdoor programs. But I wanted to show a map, say this is the United States, and we're living people. And we are also poets, because that was one of the big things that came for Native communities, was that it was like suddenly, oh, wow, because a lot of people think we're not here. We're just some kind of mythical story, hiding or being denied at the roots of America, or some kind of misty, shameful past. But we're also poets. We're all kinds of people, just like everyone. So this map will say we are part of American poetry. We are essential to American poetry. And here we are. And we have contemporary poets. And so it would show a map of Native poets all over this country. And it was in a kind of story map format with little pop-ups with the images of the poets, them reading a poem, and giving a context about where they live. Because some poets, like there's a whole story. I mean, like, I'm from Tulsa here. Well, Tulsa is the northern border of the Creek Nation, west of the Mississippi. So we were here basically in exile. We were forced here by the U.S. government I have a map in American Sunrise of one side of my family, because there were several sides on the Trail of Tears, but on one particular line coming up from what's now Talladega, Alabama, up along the river. I mean, the rivers are the roadways. They were the roadways, and into Fort Gibson area and into Oklahoma. And but I'm here in Tulsa, and some poets I know Heidi Rodriguez, for example, lives in the Twin Cities, but her people are from North Dakota. There's lots of stories too about those migrations.
Yeah. Well, and if we had done this project at a different time in your life, you could have been in Los Angeles, you could have been in Knoxville, Tennessee,
or Hawaii.
Yeah. So part of the project is that we are through this story map software geolocating the poets we are featuring, but that's just locating them where they are at a particular moment. It doesn't speak to how they see themselves as part of, and their lives and their lineage and their culture as part of a larger map, a larger space.
Also, what's exciting, and it's not, I mean, we have a capacity problem here. The larger vision would be to have a map of American poets. But there's just so many of us. There's so many of us and so much time. But this can be a challenge to everybody out there at AWP. You can do, and somebody has, who was it that did the one of Utah?
Paisley Rexall as the state poet laureate of Utah. Yeah,
the state, poet laureate of Utah has done one of Utah, but you could take the story map. The technology is out there. I mean, it's free, isn't it? Or it's available. And, it would be cool to have this kind of hook up, every state do this map of poets and then have them all hook up. So what I like about it is that there's, this is something that can be grown.
Exactly. Well, and it's interesting too, it's coming out at the same time as your anthology, When the Light of the World Was Subdued, Our Songs Came Through, a Norton anthology of Native Nations poetry, which is slated to be published in August. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Yes,
here it is.
Right there. It had such a beautiful cover too.
I'm trying to make it even.
Perfect.
This was... we decided it's an all native, all the editors are native poets. We figured we're the experts, but we're all native poets, and we put it together. We decided that we would look at geographical areas
Mhm.
rather than states, even though, states are a part of it. 5 geographical areas. Each area had a group of contributing editors, and then others who became more like advisors for that group. And a lot of editors. And I was the core team was Leanne Howe, Choctaw, fiction writer, poet, playwright, and Jennifer Forrester, Muskogee Creek poet. And then we had a team that ranged from Roberta Hill to Kimberly Blazer, Diane Benson out in Alaska, Brandy and Nalani McDougall in Hawaii. I think Sherwin Bitsui was part of it. Layli Longshaw, a lot of poets.
Yeah.
Santee Frazier. So we all worked on it, and it's the first. I mean, several years back, I did an anthology for Norton of North American Native women's poetry called "Reinventing the Enemy's Language." But this is the first, like, Norton anthology of Native poetry, of historic. I think one of the oldest pieces is an excerpt from the Kumulipo, which is a Hawaiian creation story. And it's a small excerpt because, the story could take several days. It's a very small excerpt.
Yeah.
And all the way to the youngest poets, who are, I think, Jake Skeet. Jake, Skeet is Navajo, is the youngest, one of the youngest. There's 2 of them. And so there's quite a range.
Yeah. Well, it's just wild to think of that anthology coming out and that range you discuss and the way in which it features all these voices from past and present, all these Native voices. And then the project, which is going to feature all these poets on this map that people can engage with. So assuming that we're still spending a lot of time at home and practicing social distancing, you're offering America both a wonderfully thick and full and powerful anthology and this map for them to start exploring Native voices through. And you have with the project this the development of this collection at the library. Maybe you can talk about what it means to have created or to be creating a collection of Native poets and their voices alongside the collections that you've gotten a chance to check out when you've come to visit the library.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by collections.
So the project will both live online as a story map, but
right.
AFC is also creating this collection that will live as a collection of these recordings of Native poets that are part of the story map. So when you started out as Poet Laureate, you had the chance to go to the American Folklife Center and listen to ethnographic recordings. And now your project will be adding these recordings in this collection to all of that wealth of information and resources.
That's exciting to me. So yeah, I get it. That was one of the most exciting things that we came to. This has been a year. This has been a year of Rob and then Anne, the team there.
Yeah.
And, Anya, and then Jennifer. Just trying to figure out how and what and when. It's been a long time, but yeah, it's really exciting because we'll have this map, but we're also will have, like you said, a collection of Native voices at this time in history. And they'll be there.
They'll be there forever, and they will mark your laureateship too. So we'll not only have this project online, but all these voices, which hopefully we can add to, and that will also, in interesting ways, connect to all of the various other items we have by a given poet, say Hyde Erdrich, at the Library of Congress, but also interact with, but up against all these other collections we have of Native artists and Native peoples, Native writers. So it, in a way, helps further expand the resources the library had and reimagine them through these sort of singular poems and voices.
And I think it's exciting that I can imagine, like school children now going to school and hearing Native poets, because, I grew up, I knew about African American poets because I always loved the poetry. And I knew about, a few, other poets, mostly European, Western European poetry.
Yeah.
But to have natives and just included there, like, people might say, hey, Alexander Posey. I would have loved to, I think about what that would have done to I might have even, because I love poetry. I mean, I love songs and so on, but I love poetry and would ask for books of poetry because, it has something to do. I've been writing about it in my memoir, so I can get more eloquent once I've gotten to revise it 50, 60 times. But there is something about those pockets of energetics, with rhythmic patterns and statements and content that did so much. If I think what would have happened if I had known that in my neighborhood, that poetry, that it was even a possibility, that it was part of us in a way, part of the culture instead of, I had to find it.
Yeah.
But it was more, I don't know how it is in schools now, but I know that when I was there, the teachers were forced, usually they let they were forced to teach a poetry, to teach poetry.
Yeah.
I had my sister who taught poetry in elementary school. She's a school teacher, and the kids would come in every day. Mrs. Barrows, can we write a poem today? I mean, it just depends. But it is so much a part of us as human beings.
Yeah.
I think it was there. When fire was invented, so was poetry.
Yeah. Well, as long as there were words, there were ways in which we were engaging the mystery of them through poems.
And acting contradictorily.
Yeah. And enjoying the rhythm of language. So I want to just get to these questions that I have. AWP asked its membership if they would be interested in sending in questions for you to answer. And thanks to everyone who sent in a question. There were a great, smart range of questions. And I'm just going to bounce around to them. I apologize for not being able to get to every question that we got in. Here's an interesting question. What's being done to address the needs of poets and communities that aren't connected digitally? I'm thinking of poor people, folks who are incarcerated, or elders.
Yeah, I wonder how that's going to work if you cannot go in there virtually. And I think about I was on the phone the other day with Denise Chavez. She's done a lot down in the Las Cruces area to bring books in Spanish to the children, along the border. And she said they haven't been able to get, because of the pandemic. Yeah. So I don't know. I'd be interested in hearing what's being done because I don't know. I see I'm living in the arts district here in Tulsa, and it's also the district. It's a lot of the homeless walk through here. And I wonder about that.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, books are a great durable technology, and hopefully, if people who don't have access to the internet can get their hands on books and books of poems, they can engage with the art in ways that we who are lucky enough to have the internet can do so online. This is kind of an interesting related question, and one I know you care about. Many poets struggle with wanting to give to their communities while also needing to cover real cost on the levels of housing, food, medical care, education, and supporting our families. How can we honor the role of poets as a public good while reinforcing the importance of compensating poets for their labor?
Oh man, how long do we have?
Yeah.
I mean, that goes way back. I mean, even if somebody says they're going to become a poet, and I remember when I said that with 2 young children, and it's like, no, you can't do that. How are you going to make a living? And most Native students, you know, going to the university, we were there to make a living. You know, we grew up through, a lot of us, not everybody, but a lot of poverty. That was a ticket to make a living and to bring up the people.
Yeah.
And then to become a poet. I mean, what poetry does place have?
Yeah.
You know what? It's sometimes it's seen as superfluous to be a poet, or it's wasting time, or it's not really. You know, I mean, there are real needs. You know, there are needs for. You know, there's ventilate. You know, people are struggling. There's, you know, there's a, you know, food. We have, you know, and you look at Native communities. So what place does it comes down to what place does poetry have, and is it valuable?
Yeah.
And I keep thinking about how, as a child, we were told humans needed food, clothing, and shelter. But imagine a world with no art in it or no poetry. You know, we're not just, that assumes that we're just bodies here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we need, you know, I think, you know, it's time that we honor the place of the arts, because that's what's getting everybody, you know, that's what's getting people through the pandemic. You go to Netflix, there's some art there, you know, there's art there. There's art in the poetry and the images that are, you know, helping people move through. We need that. I mean, that's what we're here, not to grow our bodies, but to take care of them. But we're here to grow our minds and to grow spiritually and to make connections and to, you know, try to understand the contradictions within ourselves and with. So yeah, I know I come up against that too. I come up against that, you know, with, you know, because of course we're like everybody. We, you know, like we have family, we have to, you know, we're multi-dimensional kinds of beings.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It gets difficult to satisfy the demands, or, you know, it's hard to walk sometimes. I remember having to explain, or try to explain, to get a scholarship for Iowa. You know, at that point didn't give money for higher education except undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
Said, well, poetry is at the bottom. It was for God. You know, it's not essential. And I understand we need doctors, lawyers, but we need no hierarchy like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't really have a good answer for that question.
Well, this is an interesting related question, but from the other perspective, it essentially is, at this moment of crisis, we're turning to poetry. But what do we do to ensure that people still turn to poetry after the crisis is over?
Well, I don't know what we can do. One thing that I've seen is that how necessary, you know, that everyone is turning to the arts. People are turning to poetry. We see how necessary it is.
Yeah.
And yet what's also happening is then they don't get paid for their work. You know, they're appearing virtually, and some people will pay, it's like pennies to the dollar for performing. I mean, how do you know, what's the value? I think poetry always has a place. Yeah. I don't know that, I think if we live poetry, you know, and make it part of our, and maybe this pandemic thing it is part of our everyday life. And what I've seen in other countries all over the world, and I've been to poetry festivals and so on, is that in a lot of countries, it's always, you'll see it in the supermarket right up with all the other books, you know, that it's, and of course, like everyone, I think, well, why don't we have that here?
Yeah.
I think it's, you know, I think too, as we move through these times, this is only the beginning. This is only going to be the beginning of what we're going to go through. And you'll notice that poetry, I mean, I guess when they start killing poets for poetry, we'll know it really, you know, but the poets are we're usually a little ahead of what's going on, and I think poetry is, you have to tell the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then a poem can hold grief, it can hold all of this. And so as we move through this, there's the pandemic. This isn't going to be the only thing that happens.
Yeah.
We're watching earth changes, and there's going to be some intense ones. We're already experiencing food shortages.
Yeah.
There'll be more.
Yeah.
And poetry, we're going to have to, it's almost like a poem can be a place to plant part of your, okay. Like I did a poem once for my daughter, Rainy Dawn, when she was turning 14, and I knew that it was going to be a rough ride because of her, challenging and so on, but I knew she would make it through.
Yeah.
But that poem to say, okay, here, you were born and this is what you were given, and here it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a poem. So I think poetry will continue to have meaning. I mean, it always will. They'll always be there. But I think will even more so as we move as world citizens, and as world citizens, because that's what's happening. But also as people in this country.
Yeah.
Because it is a way we can speak with each other beyond the ordinary yammer.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a question about how our work can continue to address the wrongs of the past while we live in this crisis, while we contend with this, the crisis of this moment, and maybe you can speak to that.
Well, of course, I mean, everybody is, the past has everything to do with the present. If we go digging, everybody, there's always, as poets, and as humans, for reasoning and for poetry, you look for patterning.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it is. You look for, it's about patterning. I've been thinking about patterning a lot. As I learn bass, I'm learning bass, and then I'm working on this album, and then writing poetry, and I've been writing songs, so we're doing poetry, and then writing a memoir, which I'm still there's still patterning in this because I write a poet. But yeah, I don't know what starts happening. What I've noticed is that in these times, then the danger of what starts happening is that we turn towards a very conservative point of view. It becomes, well, poetry's not important. There it is. We've got to survive, or we've got to deal with this. So that's usually, it's like in the Native community, we say, well, we can watch our popularity go up and down. We might come to time, well, we don't want to hear about this. We're trying to do this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you want to understand the pandemic, if you want to understand exactly what we're involved here together as, as a country, with all of the terrible intricacies of history, and myth making and so on, you have to, there's oh man, there's deep roots.
Yeah. You've been, at this time, as we've discussed, very prolific, very creative. There were a couple of questions about what to do if you're finding it difficult to write at this moment, and what exercise you may have that you could suggest, which I think is an especially salient question for the AWP member community.
Oh man, I guess for one, like yesterday, I've been writing this. I've got a deadline. I wrote about 8 lines, and I sat there and paddled and thought, you know what? I'm not supposed to be writing right now. I'm just going to get up and walk around.
Yeah.
What I found is that it's usually, I'm not writing what I'm supposed to, it's either I need a break, or I need to go read something. There's something that I need to bring back.
Yeah.
So then I'll ask. You can just ask. The same way you write a poem. You can even ask in a poem. That's what I would do. Is say, write address what it is that you're having difficulty with.
Mhm.
I can't write. You know, who is the God of all not writing, you know?
Oh, to the God of not writing.
Yeah. So that's what I tend to do is I'll go headlong into it
Yeah.
and address it, you
Yeah.
know, address it. Usually there's something there that I've noticed in my life. I've had to do what I was absolutely fearful of doing,
Yeah.
like being on a video with talking about being a poet. Yeah, being a poet and you know, being a poet for one, playing saxophone.
Being on stage. I
Yeah,
remember you talking about in your opening reading.
yeah. I used to have horrible stage fright.
Yeah.
And then I learned, and maybe this is another thing about writing. I mean, if you want, I'm not good at doing prompts, but
Mhm.
you know, it's about rhythm. I found that that's what helped me with stage fright. I thought, okay, and it wasn't just me; it's that voice that gives me the best stuff in my poems. You know, the best lines or the moments I turn towards, and it told me, it says, okay, just it'll be okay if you just listen to the music.
Yeah.
And so, sitting here by yourself in front of your computer, typewriter, paper, just
Uh-huh.
listen to the music because it's everywhere.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, this is an interesting question too. What advice might you have for AWP members about distinguishing between productivity and perfectionism in the world of COVID-19 and beyond?
Whoa, productivity and perfectionism. I could probably talk quite a while on that, but I'd have to write it. I'd have to write out an outline because I know that I have gotten in my way. I mean, I'm a perfectionist,
Yeah.
and it's gotten. I had to send a bass line off to somebody. I had given him part of it, and they were so excited that I'm learning bass, and I worked on it for like 2 weeks,
Yeah.
and it's still not right.
Yeah.
That was a poem. And then productivity. Well, you can't put out what is not going to be the highest standard, but you also can't pick it to pieces. And I read, somebody sent me a draft, Barrett Martin. He's an ethnomusicologist, a drummer, a major drummer from the Seattle scene. And then he's also studied with different healers. And one of them, I think, told him that slowly is holy. And I like that. I was thinking,
Wow.
it's been my mantra all week since I read it.
Huh.
I think her name is Carol Hartness. But
Mm-hmm.
slowly is holy. I thought, okay, because I may not seem that way. People always say I seem real calm, but there's that part of me that the one that's always analyzing goes very fast.
Yeah.
And does not like to slow down. It's like, okay, you want to play a scale, I want to play it, you know, really fast, but I can't do it technically as fast as I want to, and I have a hard time slowing down. But that's a lot of it there too. It's like, okay, which means for me it means getting the perfectionist out. Yes, it will come. Nothing is perfect in this world, but it's focusing instead on the angle of the line.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how it fits, you know, or how one thing fits another against another, even disjunctly fits.
Yep. Yep.
So I hope not the right answer to the question.
No, that's a great answer. Slowly is holy is a beautiful response to that question.
I love that because it kind of, you've got to get out of that. I think there's the perfectionist mind is, at least my interpretation of it or feel, it's usually coming from the outside.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's coming from the ways that you see what everybody else is doing. You see somebody else coming out with a book. You see somebody else doing this, and this. And instead, that slowly is like taking a deep breath and you go inside to where you are.
Yeah, yeah.
Where you are. And another thing I've done when this gets in the way is say, okay, write a bad poem. Yeah, it works.
Yeah.
If you're driving yourself nuts with this first you got to tell that one to go away.
Yeah.
And then you just got to tell it go away, and then tell yourself to write it bad. That's one way I've gotten myself to write like a memoir. Write it bad. Just write it bad.
Yeah.
So much fun that it just there you find it because you've let go.
Yeah, you've given yourself permission in a sense.
Yeah.
Well, this relates to one last question I want to ask you, just about the journey of writing your books of poems. Someone asked how your first book differs from An American Sunrise, what you think in your writing style has changed and what has remained the same. And I know from talking to you about An American Sunrise that it was somewhat different. The process of writing and revising was different than previous books. So maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, I don't know which first book. I mean, She Had Some Horses. I had books before that. And that one had some of those one image kinds of, that's, then I went into a kind of prose poem writing in Mad Love and War. And then with Woman Who Fell from the Sky, I was doing this thing, and I've done it in every book, even this one in a different way. It's like thinking of almost like how poetry exists in a tribal community. It's not just somebody getting up there and declaiming poetry, but it's usually in the context of a circle and people speaking eloquently, singing something, telling a little piece of something. And that's how these books have been put together. American Sunrise came, it surprised me. I wasn't ready to write a book, but it's basically about pulling pieces of history together and then singing about it sometime, another time, including pieces from what happened or a map.
Yeah.
So it was a little different. And then I'm wondering where it's going to go. And I think it's going to go a lot more lyrically, because the poem that I wrote, I have it right here. It's The Life of Beauty, the most recent poem, except for some songs I've been writing.
Yeah.
Can you
read it for us?
I'd have to find it. I know where it is. Hang on. I can find it.
It seems like the perfect way to end this amazing conversation. I love that you're searching in your studio.
Yeah, if they can put it on hold. I know I stuck it in here. Here it is.
Okay.
And this was this New York Times asked, why is beauty, however defined, important in our lives? And I thought, how in the world can anybody answer that question? The question is totally unanswerable, but I guess that's where the trick is. And then I was so tired and I had so many obligations, and then I just let my poetry voice take over.
Yeah.
I revised it, and I might revise it again, and now I'm going to turn it into a song. But this is The Life of Beauty. And I used all the words that I was told not to use in workshops. The life of beauty. The sung blessing of creation led her into the human story. That was the first beauty. Next beauty was the sound of her mother's voice rippling the waters beneath the drumming skin of her birthing cocoon. Next beauty, the father with kindness in his hands as he held the newborn against his breathing. Next beauty, the moon through the dark window. It was a rocking horse, a wish. There were many beauties in this age, for everything was immensely itself. Green, greener than the impossibility of green, the taste of wind after its slide through dew grass at dawn, or language running through a tangle of wordlessness in her mouth. She ate well of the next beauty. Next beauty planted itself urgently beneath the warrior's shrines. Next beauty was beaded by her mother and pinned neatly to hold back her hair. Then how tendrils of fire longing grew into her, beautiful the flower between her legs as she became herself. Do not forget this beauty, she was told. The story took her far away from beauty in the tests of her living. Beauty was often long from the reach of her mind and spirit. When she forgot beauty, all was brutal. But beauty always came to lift her up to stand again. When it was beautiful all around and within, she knew herself to be cornplant, moon, and sunrise. Death is beautiful, she sang, as she left this story behind her. Even her bones, said time, were tuned to beauty.
Wow. What an amazing way to end an incredible conversation. Joy, thank you for taking this time out of your schedule to talk with us about your laureateship, poetry, answer questions from AWP members. It really was an honor to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Rob, and it's been an honor to work with you all this time, and we've worked through a lot in this year, and for AWP, which has been there probably almost since the beginning of when I started writing poetry.
Yeah.
I remember those really early, like Tempe, and I got to do honor with some band members, Adrian Rich, and so AWP has been really important it's amazing what it's grown into.
Yeah.
So I'll be joining everybody. I hope that Kansas City is still on, and I'm excited about that. And so thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks to Sheila and to Juanita and everyone at AWP. And as you said, Joy, hopefully we'll all be together again in person in the beginning of March at AWP in Kansas City for your keynote address. Okay. Until then, have a good rest of your National Poetry Month and spring.
Okay.